Well, welcome back, and I hope you took some time to think through these questions, but I will show you where these questions can be answered. Most of these concept checks are right in the PowerPoint, so they should not be hard to find the answers. But what types of microorganisms are considered microbes? If you go back to this slide, there's the bacteria, fungi, protozoa, viruses, prions, helminths. Those are the main groups of microorganisms that we are going to be studying. List and describe 3 branches. There are not just 3, but they're just the question is just asking you to pick 3 and discuss them. There's several. Medical microbiology, which studies disease in humans and animals, and then public health microbiology and epidemiology that looks at the frequency and control of the spread of diseases in a population. Immunology, which is looking at the immune system and how we can learn from it and learn how it works. And industrial microbiology, which looks at the safeguarding our food and water supply, which are some of the practical jobs that are needed like all over the country. You could go anywhere and get jobs at the different plants, manufacturing plants that manufacture food, and water plants, water treatment plants in lots of locations. And then biomanufacturing, which is becoming a newer thing related to biotechnology. Agricultural microbiology, looking at plants and animals and microbes. Environmental microbiology, looking at all the diverse habitats on Earth and the microbes that are found there. And astrobiology, looking outside of Earth's atmosphere and seeing where those are located in the galaxy. So now we're ready for section 2, the impact of microbes on Earth, small organisms with a giant effect. And so our main outcome that we want to get from this is describe the role and impact of microbes on Earth. And quite frankly, if you just watch this video, World Without Microbes, it's from a series called I Contain Multitudes by Ed Young, you will pretty much answer that question. What would it be like if we had all of the microorganisms disappeared? What would happen? And so it's a thought experiment by Jack Gilbert, and they talk about it in here, and it's very scary, but it shows just how important microorganisms are. And so first of all, just talking about the 2 different kinds of microorganisms, the eukaryotes and the akaryotes, I guess is the new term that we're using for it, because they lack a nucleus, we call them akaryotes. And having a true nucleus is the eukaryotes. So what are eukarya, bacteria, and archaea? The eukaryotes are ones which have a true nucleus. And that true nucleus is what they saw when they first looked at them. So EU, whenever you see that in a word, means true, and karyo means nut, which means is what they're referring to when they talk about the nucleus. And so when you have a karyote, that means no nut or no nucleus. And so those are the 2 main kinds. Bacteria and archaea both lack a nucleus, and they used to be part of the same kingdom, and we called them prokaryotes because that was before the nut, but really it's better to say akaryote because that's really more exactly what it's saying. It is, they have no nucleus. So the big difference between prokaryote or bacteria and archaea and the eukaryotes is the presence or absence of a nucleus. So cells with a nucleus are classified as eukaryotes, and those that do not have a nucleus are called these akaryotes or whatever. Mostly in this unit, in this semester, we're going to be looking at the bacteria, not so much the archaea, because the archaea are what we would call extremophiles. And that's because they live in really extreme environments, and philes is what we use, the Greek word for love. So they love an extreme environment, and these extremophiles would not grow in our body, so they're not pathogens. They can't exist in our body because they're either very heat loving or very cold loving or very salt loving or very acidic loving, and so we have none of those. We're very neutral pH, we're very middle of the road temperature and environment. And so the bacteria are the ones that actually would be potential pathogens. And so that's what we're going to mainly focus on. But there will be some discussion of eukaryotic microorganisms like fungi and protozoans and some helminths that will be in Chapter 5. But mostly it's going to be about the bacteria. Bacteria are ubiquitous. That means they are everywhere. They are found in the deep of the earth crust. They're in polar ice caps. They're in the ocean. They're inside bodies of plants and animals. They're pretty much everywhere. You can't go anywhere on earth where there's no microbes, where it's completely sterile. So microbe involvement in shaping our planet. So it has a huge impact on the flow of energy. So sunlight is taken in by photosynthetic bacteria and microbes and then converted into food, which then consumers eat, and then they're decomposed by the bacteria and the fungi, the decomposers. And so there's that flow of energy, there's that flow of nutrients as well, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle, all of those things. Microbes are deeply involved in those cycles, in those pathways. So the production of oxygen by microbes allowed species diversification. So before, there was a lot of photosynthesis going on that produced oxygen. Was pretty much oxygen was pretty much non-existent, and so most of the organisms, the cells did fermentation, and so once the organism started producing oxygen, then they had to figure out a way to live in oxygen, and so that allowed a lot of diversification of the species. Photosynthetic microorganisms, bacteria and algae, account for 70% of the Earth's photosynthesis, contributing to the majority of the oxygen. So in other words, 30% of the Earth's oxygen actually comes from plants, and all the rest, the 70 other percent, are coming from microorganisms. So one of the things that they talk about in the video that I was referencing earlier is just like what would happen. People would not be able to breathe because there wouldn't be enough oxygen, and so that's a huge thing. You can see this lovely pond habitat with algae, just a mat of algae growing there, and it's producing they're just doing a lot of photosynthesis and producing a lot of oxygen there. Also, decomposition is a huge impact, and without microbes, we would be up to our eyeballs in dead matter and waste material that would not decompose. And so that is done by bacteria and fungi, which are microorganisms. So without, this is another aspect. Now, it wouldn't smell, but there's so many other things, like we wouldn't be able to eat, we would run out of food. There's just all kinds of things that, microorganisms are the basis of our food chain, and they're the producers. And without producers, you wouldn't have consumers, and without producers and consumers, and you don't have decomposers, so you just be up to your eyeballs in waste. So it wouldn't be dried out and looking like it is, because that's still part of decomposition. But it would be very difficult to live in that kind of atmosphere. So microorganisms drive the structure and content of soil and water and the atmosphere. They contribute a lot of the gases like carbon dioxide and oxygen and nitrous oxide and methane, all of these that provide basically a protective layer around the earth. That is our greenhouse gases. And while everybody boo-hoos about the greenhouse gases, if we didn't have the greenhouse gases, hello, this planet would be totally hot whenever it was during the day, and it'd be totally cold at night. So this keeps the this layer of greenhouse gases actually keeps all of the heat kind of in. And obviously too much of it, you get the greenhouse effect and you have global warming. But there is, to a certain extent, we wouldn't exist without these gases in the first place. And breathing oxygen and all that, we would not be able to exist. And the plants wouldn't be able to exist without the CO2, which is converted by photosynthesis into oxygen and carbohydrates. And so all of that would not be present if we didn't have microbes. And then there's microbes living in the Earth's crust, and they have a lot to do with the content and the structure. And so soil erosion, or like erosion of the rock and the formation of soil, we believe we're finding out more and more that the microbes have a lot to do with that production of the soil and nutrient cycling and everything. Bacteria and fungi live in these complex associations with plants and animals. So they're part of the microbiota of these. They have these different associations, just like we have these associations with microbes that are part of our microbiota. So our concept check for section 2, describe the difference between an eukaryote and a eukaryote, and true or false, microscopic organisms produce more oxygen than plants. So I want you to take a short pause and come back, and we will start section 3.